one of the ways I like looking at role-playing games is in terms of generation. Now, for the purposes of that, is defining blocks of games, groups of games, by where they kind of appear, and some common narratives and traits that games of particular vintages share. So, for example, the first generation is obviously includes the original edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and also Tunnels and Trolls, which is from a similar period and came to rise at a similar time, albeit from a different direction. The second generation are those that came in because role-playing was a thing, was a developing form of gaming at the time. So that includes RuneQuest and Traveller, for example. Now the third generation is what I'm going to kind of touch on here, or a game from that generation, is that period of role-playing games, or that period in role-playing games where the genre had been established by then, the game genre had been established, and companies and so on were looking around for new subject matter to play. The previous games had largely been generic, so both Dungeons and Dragons and Tunnels and Trolls didn't really have a setting for them, although Tunnels and Trolls eventually did coalesce one. Traveller started off as a generic science fiction game, and then the Imperium developed around it as more and more source was released in the form of adventures and other materials. RuneQuest started off specifically set in Glorantha and became a bit more generic later in its life, and is now specifically set back in Glorantha again, but having had the basic role-playing game spun off from it. And one of the sources, what I'm trying to get to here, one of the sources of the third generation of role-playing games that drew on in order to produce games around was franchises. So it's within this generation that we see role-playing games based on Star Trek and on Star Wars and on various other franchises. Call of Cthulhu is another one, for example. Taking on board other people's works of imagination and then building games around them. Middle-earth role-playing, another one for it. Now, West End Games were one of the proponents of really picking up licenses right, left and centre for various games of theirs. And the Star Wars game, the initial Star Wars game, was one of the franchises they picked up. The last franchise that they picked up is going to be the subject of today's video. Just a brief one, because it's a game with a brief history to it. If you watch my video on Star Wars, it goes into the history of West End Games a little bit more, and what was really its primary game, its primary franchise, which was the Star Wars game. And as it came to the end of its life, the end of its effective life, approaching sort of 1999-2000, it produced one last game. And this final game draws upon the same core system that the previous Star Wars game used. That's a D6 system. And built it into a more fantasy type setting. So, for this, my name's Ian, and today we're just going to go through the basic concept behind, the very short history of, introducing you maybe if you've never even heard of this thing before, and West End Games' final role-playing game in the form of Hercules and Xena, the role-playing game. So we have touched on the D6 system that West End Games developed in our video on the Star Wars as a franchise. And this game follows similar kind of suit. It uses D6s, but as we will see when we delve into it, you'll see it altered the core D6 system a little bit in order to come up with something a bit more evocative of the setting. But in case you didn't know, this is based on a television series that was produced. Hercules, the television series, ran from 1994 through to 1999, starting off with some television movies and then developing into a full-blown series from 1995. And Xena, Warrior Princess, started off in 1995 and a spin-off out of 2 episodes from Hercules. So episode 9 of Hercules introduced the Xena character as an evil warlord type that was an antagonist in that particular episode. And episode 12 of Hercules, of the first series of Hercules, had Xena ally with Hercules on the start of her road to redemption. And then the Xena series itself, which ran from 1995 through to 2001, developed Xena's character and story further. The first series dealing more with her road to redemption, and then continuing on from her story from there, running into all sorts of anachronistic characters such as Caesar and so on. The game itself came out in the sort of mid period of the 2 series running, when both Hercules and Xena were actually actively on air. So this game was released in 1998. Right, so that's basically the history of it. There were plans to release more supplements for the game, but these never happened. West End Games closed down before that could go on, and it wasn't the most amazing big seller going. But there you go. It's this is the entirety of the game. This one box from West End Games. So let's crack open the box and I'll show you a little bit about what's in here. So the games itself, let's put that aside, and let's put that aside as well. Right, so the game itself comprises these dice, which follow the idea of the D66, or the D6 system. So you have successes and you have failures. So the successes are managed by chakrams, and the failures are managed by Hydra's heads. Let's just see if it will focus on those for you. Can you do that for me? Yeah, there you go. Added into the mix is what do you want to call it? The fate die, chaos die. It does call it something. We'll look that up in a second. But this dice has got a number of odds and sods written on it. So you've got the Hydra of failure, and you've got the chakram of success, but you've also got the bolt of Zeus and the eye of Hera. All of which add to the mix. So if you know anything about the D6 game, your attributes, skills and what have you form a pool of dice. In this particular iteration of it, you add in the let's look that up in a second, whatever that dice is called, into the mix. So if you've got a pool of 5 dice to throw, you all throw 4 normal dice and the red one, and whatever the determination of combination of chakrams and hydras and Zeus's lightning bolts and eyes of Hera come up with will determine your degree of success or failure. Right, so that's the basic dice. So in the box is also a rulebook. In my particular box are also 2 rulebooks. This is because it was the rule book itself was also sold separately, and it just seemed, for some reason, it seemed logical to me to have 2 copies of the rules, one for players, one for the DM, instead of handing one around all the time. Now, it's very prettily formatted, although black on a dark background is not necessarily the greatest thing to go through. And it's usual sort of, the usual stuff. This is how a role-playing game goes. This is some basic bits. This is how you create characters. Thing on names. Thing on your attributes. Let's find out whether it's just all of that. It goes on about your templates and your race. Or species, whatever you want to call it, where you got centaurs and everything else, centaurs and humans and Amazons and so on. There we go. So this is where it describes the faces of the dice. You've got a thunderbolt of Zeus, the Eye of Hera, which are special symbols, and then the chakram and a hydra, which deal with your successes and failures. Now this is in the Star Wars games and the other D6 games. The chakram and the hydra represent your numbers, but it just goes through. There we go. They call it the wild die. The wild die just gives you where it goes through to make the game more heroic and more fun. One of the dice used to make an action roll is called the wild die, as the Eye of Hera and a thunderbolt of Zeus, in addition to the chakram and the hydra. It has a special function. The die works normally unless the eye or the thunderbolt turn up. When the wild die rolls the Eye of Hera, something terrible has transpired. The hero has botched the action in some way, and the player excludes the wild die from all the other dies that came up with success when counting the number of hits. And then it's if the thunderbolt comes up, then something good has happened, and it sort of counts towards the total number of successes. Yeah, so this is where we go. Using standard 6-sided dice, then 1s and 2s are hydras, 3, 4, 5s and 6 are chakrams. Right. On the wild die, the 1 is the Eye of Hera, 6 is the thunderbolt of Zeus. And other than the wild die, the way that the chakrams and hydras work on the 6-sided dice that come with it is the same way as it is in Star Wars. So there we go. So it uses lots of photographs as illustrations from the TV series. There are 2 ways of creating characters in this. One is by picking up a template, and one is by creating the character from scratch. So this is, both of the systems are described in here. Again, that's similar to the Star Wars game, where you've got a lot of templates, and the templates are described here at the back. So you've got healer, thief, blank character sheet, gladiator, archer, Amazon, whatever. So you've got all of the things. Then you've got equipment, you've got magic items, you've got basically everything that you need. Chariots, transportation. A lot of this is just equipment stuff. Still on equipment stuff, and you've got some characters. You've got the statistics of things like there's Joxus, Salmonius, Autolycus, Gabrielle, Aeolus, Xena, and of course Hercules. So all of there's no sort of separation really. Yeah, so most of the book up to there, not very much, is about creating characters, either from template or by doing everything from scratch, and the rest of the book is NPC stats, equipment, templates, and so forth. So that's your basic rule book. Then you've got Secrets of the Ancient World, which is some of the odds and sods that you've got. Things of like monsters. This is really the referee's book. Doesn't particularly have rules in it, but it is more, how to be a referee, how to go and referee them, how to set difficulties, how to adjudicate various actions, and like I said, monster stats, how to put adventures together, and so on. So it's a similar kind of breakdown as to what we have in Dungeons and Dragons these days, where the Dungeon Master Guide back in first edition used to be the arbiter of all things rules, and the player's handbook was really just, here's a bunch of stuff about characters, and then here's the spells that your character will use. So from third edition on, from second edition on, that changed, and the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook became the primary rule book. So all the rules were in the second edition Player's Handbook, or the Player's Handbook, and the Dungeon Master's Guide was then given over to help and advice for Dungeon Masters, and the things that only a Dungeon Master will know about, at least at the start, things like descriptions of magic items and so on. And this is used in the same way here. So the setting, the magic items, well, actually magic items are described in there, but more on that kind of stuff in here, and you know, a bit of a bestiary of monsters, and yeah, a bit on the gods and Greek mythology in general, and so on and so forth. So this has also got a campaign map, but it is very very sparse. I mean, there's not really much in it, and it does describe some of the locations and things, but not really described very well. But just so happened that at one point TSR produced a historical reference, or HR, series of books for second edition. They all had a green cover to them, and one of them was dealt with the Age of Heroes, the Greek hero type things, which came with a map that is more useful to a games master in this particular period. So this is why this particular map appears in my box of this particular game. It's just more useful than it is than the maps provided with the game itself. Right, so that's why that book is in there. That book, if you go and pick up a box of this set, you won't necessarily end up with this map in it unless someone has done the same thing. Right, so let's set that aside. Let's take that out. You also get, this is why I skipped over this bit when I first pulled these out, you get a selection of adventures. So there are three adventures. There's a solitaire one, and there is a couple of refereed ones. So and they are okay, you know, they're not particularly very long, but they describe a scenario, and they are of the similar kind of flavour that you get in the television series. So yeah, fine for this for the purpose of this particular game. And last thing you get in there is a referee screen, because it's a pretty simple game. I mean, if you've ever played the D6 version of Star Wars from West End Games, you'll know that there are some fairly complicated things in there when you add in starship combat and all that kind of thing. But because this is presented as a beginner game, a sort of starting point for a Xena and Hercules role-playing game, there was the promise of a book with more advanced rules in it, and more expansions, and a monster book and all this kind of stuff that never happened. So what we've ended up with this is a game that's a single box, that's basic rules that are, you know, good enough to have some fun with. And it is actually, because it's so simple, and because it was never really expanded much beyond this box, well, at all beyond this box, then it does stand as a very good in to the whole point, to the whole hobby of role playing. It's dead easy to learn. It's got a nice theme to it. Ties in with television series. If you get the kids to go and watch the TV series, and they get into that, then this is a good game to start them on and create their own mythical Greek heroes in the same cut from the same mould as the likes of Xena and Hercules, and there's not really much more to say about it. If you like the TV show, or you want to go and hunt down a dead easy game to play, or you're a fan of the TV shows, whatever, that kind of thing, it's good. The D6 game, the rule system as a whole is good. The testament to that is West End Games Star Wars iteration, which was really good. It had fantastic production values for its time, especially in its revised editions. And the D6 system, in general, is a very solid foundation for it. The way that it's used in this game is very evocative, especially with the chakram and hydra heads on the dice. The addition of that, I still can't remember his name, and we've just read it out. The wild die. There you go. The addition of the wild die does add a bit of random chaos to things. But other than that, it kind of is what it is. West End Games' final role-playing game. An interesting iteration of the D6 role-playing game as itself. A nice tie-in to what was a good series for that time. It was fun, certainly. Didn't stretch your mind too much, but it filled a bit of a niche that was not really much else going on at the time that was going there. The production company did lead on to do some really awful series off the back of it. They did attempts at Sinbad and Robin Hood that were just bad, which is probably why we don't often see them repeated or iterated or anything anywhere ever good. Long may they be vanished. But Hercules and Xena are definitely good television series. I think Xena especially, there was a lot more in the way of character development and story arcs in Xena, more so than there was in Hercules. Hercules was more or less a Monster of the Week show, but it was, fine. So there you have it. Hercules and Xena, the role-playing game. A third generation part of the period of role-playing game history when the rise of franchises, or the rise of tie-in, role-playing game tie-ins to franchises, that really started to pick up. So that's all I've got. This is a bit of an interim video, because I'm in the process of editing another longer video on growing up as a gamer in the UK from the 1970s on, which I'm waiting for a couple of bits to arrive to add in. That I did some digging and thought, oh, that'd be interesting to include that. So this is an interim. I didn't intend to put this game in this part, this sequence, or this part of our road that we're on with these game history ones. So it's a bit off the cuff, but then again, there's not really much else you can say about this game. There's no real in-depth history to it, so there's no point doing a real in-depth history video for it. So yeah, so look out for some odds and sods we've got coming up. Like I said, I've got a video in the works, but the editing of that, or the piecing together of that, is taking a little bit of time. Partly because I've got a lot on in the real world beyond YouTube. Not in the least. A lot of stuff that's going on in scouting at the moment in my neck of the woods, and also the archery classification season, or classification shoots, have begun again now that we are out of most of the of the restrictions for plagues. So yeah, my little life's taken up. Oh, and gigging, of course. You get more of a sense of that through the channel, the bits of music that I push up there. So, bit of an ad hoc one, bit of an off the cuff one. Didn't write a script for it. Probably can tell by the and ahhing that's going on. Longer form version video on being a UK gamer from the time in my youth. Coming up eventually, hopefully soon, and just keep an eye. I think there's a longer chunk at the end of that which goes into more about what I've got planned going forwards. So until all that turns up, have a great weekend and a great week and a great month, and just enjoy. Until the next time, take care.